This is Twit.
I was talking about the difference in pixel resolution between the terms 4K and Ultra HD. Those terms are used synonymously, but they actually don't mean quite the same thing, do they?
Well, they don't. Yeah, UHD TV evolves from HD TV, so it's really a doubling of the horizontal pixels and the lines on the screen. So 1920 pixels by 1080 lines is doubled in both dimensions. 4K is truly 4K, so it's 2048 pixels doubled horizontally. So they're very similar, but they're not the same at all. But as you see in the press and as you see in the advertising, they're called the same thing interchangeably. And in fact, 4K is the terminology that most people seem to understand as UHD TV right now, which is in fact dead wrong.
Which is in fact dead wrong. Rich, you're more familiar with the commercial cinema end of things, which is where 4K is really the correct term, right?
That's right, yeah. And it is something that's a bit of a bone of contention, particularly with the creative community who have spent a lot of time. Certainly, we've had 4K for some time in cinema with digital cinema. And so from when we transitioned from 35mm to digital, we had 2K, which is a little bit more than HD, but it wasn't felt that at the time amongst the creatives, this was enough to really represent the quality that could be achieved on film. So we also had the 4K standard, which was, over 4,000 pixels wide. And now we have the UHD standard, which is less than 4,000 pixels, only a few less, admittedly, but it is less. And so the creative end of the professional community is somewhat, I wouldn't go so far as to say annoyed, but they feel it adds a lot of confusion when you have two standards with the same name being put in front of consumers. So when you go to the cinema and see 4K, and when you see 4K, in inverted commas, UHD TV 4K at home, they aren't actually the same thing.
No, and it has to do with the horizontal resolution, as we've been saying. UHD TV is 3840, exactly twice 1920 pixels across, left to right, whereas commercial cinema 4K is 4,096 pixels across. Now, the difference isn't really that much, Rich, as you say, and yet it is a little bit different, and it comes into play. It becomes a problem when a movie that is in 4K gets distributed as UHD. Are we going to scale it downwards, or are we just going to clip off some of the sides? What do you think the answer there is going to be?
Well, that's a really interesting question, because actually both of those things are not particularly acceptable to creatives. Again, we worked very hard with digital cinema not to have any scaling processing going on in the display. Now, this is a projector rather than a screen, but nevertheless, there is a lot of image processing which is very similar to the image processing that will take place in a TV display. And what we wanted to avoid happening was any of that kind of consumer-grade image processing taking place in the projector. So we don't have any scaling in digital cinema. We use lenses to zoom the image in and out on the screen. So we retain the optical quality in the lens and the image quality in the display electronics. Now, if you then say to a creative, okay, well, I'm just going to do a little bit of scaling. I'm just going to wind this picture down, a couple of hundred pixels. Actually, to do that, you're interpolating every single pixel in the image. So now you're going to do something that takes away from the original creative intent of the cinematographer and the director in putting that picture together. So scaling isn't particularly desirable. But likewise, if you just crop the edges off the picture, you're going to take something out of the frame that was supposed to be there. So that's not particularly acceptable either. So really, I think, unfortunately, we're sort of on the horns of dilemma there, because we can't do anything that's actually perfectly acceptable. My hunch is that we'll probably scale, but and there are some very good scalers out there. But by the way, with my kind of engineering hat on and having seen a lot of different technologies in this area, there are some very good scalers. They're not the kind of things that you would want to try and implement in a display, however, because they would just be far too expensive.